Welcome to the Music Business Conversations podcast. I'm your host, John Mathis Jr., and I've worked in the music business for over 20 years and have had hundreds of conversations like the topic I am sharing today. While this podcast is still new, I try to set some realistic perspectives early on or broaden perspectives. The reason for that is based on my own experiences working with creative personalities over the years. I'm not going to pick on creative people because I am one of those. I will confess that I've had some habits or personality traits earlier in my career when it comes to creative pursuits that caused me to focus on instant outcomes. What helped me control some of those things over time was having to wear different hats or take on different roles in the music business. Boring, grinding roles like admin work or working on details or working on the not so fun parts of the music business like setting up recordings for release, clearing songs with PROs, or clearing mechanical license, and a host of other things that greatly challenged my creative, let's just make stuff and have fun side. Yes, as a young songwriter in the 90s, I was excited about my latest song. I couldn't wait to do a demo and start pitching it around. There's a thrill to creating something, and you want to share it with the world immediately. And you start dreaming of all the possibilities. Sometimes you're practically accepting awards before the demo is even done and making a list of all the little people who helped get you there that you want to be sure and thank. I'm sharing this with all of us creative folks because we're going to talk about the 3 to 5 year rule. Most songwriters want to know how I can get my song recorded or how I can get a hit song. Singers want to know how I can be a star. How can I make it or have a hit record? Musicians may want to know how can I be the first call on studio sessions or get on the big tours or be in demand for my own solo instrumental concerts. The pinnacle of success is what we all desire for what we do. It is what our dreams are made of, and we dream big. I was reminded recently of the career of a popular football coach, Nick Saban. He's mentioned a big game early in his career when he was coaching Michigan State, how it changed his entire perspective, which changed his entire career path on how he coached. He said that he knew going into the big game against powerhouse Ohio State, his team was going to lose. He was at a loss on how to approach this game with his team until he counseled with a psychiatrist. It was there that he was told, focus on the process and not the outcome. Stop worrying about the outcome of the game. You cannot control that. What you can control is the process. How well you practice, how well you prepare, how well you do your job, how well you do the things that are within your control. And he coached his players with this approach for the rest of his career. And by the way, they upset Ohio State in that game and won. Most often as creative people, we are dreamers, big dreamers. We dream big about the outcome. There's nothing wrong with dreams, and I'm not here to be a dream killer. But when we create something, when we have our latest recording or creative endeavor and we turn it loose into the world, it most often does not meet with the outcome we dreamed of. And we get disappointed, sometimes discouraged, sometimes confused. We might change directions. We might take a break. Or we may just quit. In my years of working in music, I've rarely, if ever, saw or met an overnight success. On average, it took about 3 to 5 years before someone started making some of the gains that they'd hoped to make. And yes, along the way, they had some really good creative products. Those things were going to be the thing. But those who achieved successes also realized the big picture. Every song, every recording, every date booked, every gig, every success, every failure was part of the process. It was part of the big picture, and they continued to plug away. That is why it is called the 3 to 5 year rule. It's a commitment to the process of what you do over time and not the outcome of one event. 3 to 5 years of focusing on the process. If you haven't watched the Little Things episode of this podcast, go listen to that. It's part of your process. A lot of the same processes are going to apply to singers, songwriters, and musicians. And what are some of the processes that take place in the lives of independent singers, songwriters, musicians, and others in the music industry? Networking is one, spending that 3 to 5 years networking. You've heard the old saying, it's not what you know, but who you know. Well, let's update that. It is what you know, and it is who you know. I've networked for decades, and I get calls to be involved in projects or other things. Part of it is because I know this person. And they also call me because they know what areas I've worked in and what I'm good at and what I know. Let me say this about networking as well. There's a bit of an art to it. Sure, one of the core reasons is to expand and look for opportunities, but I've always approached it as wanting to be part of a community. In other words, the first thought shouldn't be, what can this person do for me? How can they benefit me? If your primary perspective is how this person benefits me, you'll miss out on making some good friends, learning some valuable information from a new friend, or future opportunities that aren't seen in that moment of time. Everybody isn't where they're going to be right now that they're going to be later. Building and maintaining your brand or identity is also part of the 3 to 5 year journey. It's very important. It applies to us all, but singers and artists in particular. Know your musical identity. Know what that is. Know what your brand is. Stick to it for 3 to 5 years. I've seen artists in particular record an EP or song, get their brand or look that they're going for, release and promote that one recording because the outcome was what they dreamed of, but then it didn't happen according to how they dreamed it would be. So they'd switch up styles and identity and brand, which is essentially resetting the clock for 3 to 5 years and starting it over. If you're trying to get into the music business in a more traditional way or build what you do in a more traditional way, working your way into an industry, into venues, into bands, into having good relationships to pitch songs, building and maintaining a brand or identity is important. It is part of the process. If you're working on gaining a following on social media platforms with what you do, the same thing applies, brand and identity. Speaking of social media and following, it's necessary for everyone, singers, songwriters, musicians, music publishers, promoters, all of us, to work on building those followings and creating that brand and identity through social media. 3 to 5 years of maintaining, building an identity, and building real followers. There are other areas, big and small, that we'll cover later on, but that 3 to 5 year rule, the 3 to 5 years is a process of maintenance, a process of learning, and a process of building. Let me give you an example. I had a friend I worked with over 20 years ago. His wife was a Christian artist, and they initially started out traveling the country and booking dates primarily in churches. He had a background in music, but also a degree in accounting, so he could more easily wear the administration hat than a lot of creative people can. But it's a hat you will have to wear sometimes, doing your own admin work. But he had created his own review forms for each date that they had booked. It had the name of the venue or church, the address, the contact information, and in that form he wrote down what day of the week it was, what time of day, how many people were in attendance. If there was a fee or honorarium, he wrote that down. If there was a budget provided for travel, he wrote that down. He documented how much merch was sold and what type of merch was sold. And at the very bottom, he even had space for his own personal notes about the date. And sometimes he made a note that just simply said, "Don't go back." He had a lot of funny notes, and I used to read them for my own entertainment. But in 3 to 5 years, they had gone through good dates, bad dates, and the ugly dates, and were able to go back through that each year and rebook the good dates while continuing to work on finding more of those kinds of dates. They were making a good living after several years just traveling and doing those dates without having big charting hits on the radio or big sales and distribution or the other things we often think put artists in demand and over the top. They worked a process. And I've met others in Christian music or other genres who have done this same thing, spent 3 to 5 years through the good, bad, and ugly, diligently going through a process and letting the outcome happen down the road. As creative personalities, we have to wear a lot of hats. We have to learn the roles of wearing those hats and learn to do them to the best of our ability. Many of them are not fun, as writing a new song or recording a new song in the studio or standing on stage and singing or performing. But learning to focus on the process for 3 to 5 years helps us creative people step back to the 50,000-foot view and see the big picture of what we're trying to achieve. This one venue is not the answer to instant success. This one song is not the only ticket. This one gig in a band isn't the big shot. Everything isn't riding on this one recording. Those things are all part of the steps we take over a long period of time. Some will be small steps slipping off into our past with minimal response, and some will be bigger steps that lead us to the next part of the process. It's all part of the journey. I hope today's podcast helped you gain a bigger perspective about your journey and where you're at. We'll get into some of the topics a lot of people want to hear later on, like distribution, radio, what to do with songs, all of that. But in my experience, I cannot stress enough the importance of perspective and attitude if you're pursuing anything in the music business, like learning to work the process, to be diligent over time, diligent to the details, to the not so fun, not so creative stuff over 3 to 5 years. That is the secret to those I know who took years to be an overnight sensation, to be successful. Be sure to like and follow. And if you want to support this content, there are links in the description or comments. And as always, thank you for listening.